Good morning. Relatives of the more than 450 people whose lives were shortened by the inappropriate use of powerful painkillers at Gosport War Memorial Hospital are calling for a doctor who presided over the regime to face criminal charges. A report has found there was an institutionalised regime of giving dangerous doses of painkillers that weren't needed. Some families, suspicious about why their loved ones died suddenly at the hospital, have been fighting for decades to find out what happened. The damning report, released yesterday, concluded there was a disregard for human life and a culture of shortening the lives of a large number of patients. When the relatives complained about the safety of patients and the appropriateness of their care, they were consistently let down by those in authority. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, apologised for the length of time it's taken for relatives to get answers. Let's talk to two of them. Mike Hobday, whose father, Alan, died at the hospital in 1998. He found out yesterday that the drugs his father was given at the hospital had shortened his life. And Bridget Reeves is alongside me in the studio. Her family has been fighting to find out why her grandmother, Elsie, died at the hospital in 1999. And yesterday, it was confirmed that the painkillers she had been given had shortened her life. Thank you both very much for talking to us. Mike, I wonder if I could begin with you. Your father went into hospital after a stroke, and you'd always thought he died in hospital as a consequence of having that stroke. How do you react to what you know now?
Well, I feel very shocked, very upset. We have always had suspicions that something wasn't quite right. And of course, when the Rochester inquiry was started, we knew then that something wasn't right. And he was one of the 90 in that inquiry. But of course, like many other inquiries, and it was shelved and shoved under the carpet, basically.
So you had suspicions eventually. I wonder what the impact is on you and the rest of your family of carrying those suspicions over years, going through inquiry after inquiry, police investigation after police investigation, but never actually knowing.
It seemed that you were perhaps wrong, that perhaps you've read it wrong, perhaps you've got it, at times you thought maybe that didn't actually happen and he just died of natural causes, but of course now we know that he didn't, and that's quite shocking, really. Yeah.
Bridget, I wonder if you could tell us about your grandmother and why she went into hospital.
My grandmother was admitted to the Queen Alexandra Hospital for a UTI, and she was treated with routine antibiotics and fluids there, and she was discharged. But unfortunately at that time my father was undergoing a bone marrow transplant in Hammersmith Hospital, and she lived with us all in the family home, and we didn't think that it would be appropriate for her to return home to an empty house whilst we were all with my dad. So the QA recommended Gosport because the wards there were specific for respite and rehabilitation. So we knew my gran would be there for 6 weeks, just receiving, as we understood it, general care. She was very able. She got up every morning, dressed herself, washed herself, and, she used to do things around the house for us all and, still cooked meals and things like that. So she was very, well-bodied and of good mind.
And when did you realise that something was going wrong?
We had a telephone call from my uncle. It was on Friday the 19th of November in 99, just saying that he'd received a call from the hospital to say that my gran was terminal and she had 36 hours to live, which came as a huge shock to us, because we'd just seen her the week before. We would travel down from London and visit with her. We knew she wasn't happy there, but she wrote sort of cards and letters to us and said, the main thing is that Dad gets better and we all look after ourselves. She had glomerulitis, which was a filtration issue of the kidneys. It's an ongoing problem. It meant she had puffy legs and she took diuretics for that. But we knew that was a very slow process. She would eventually most likely die of that, had she not got anything else. But it is slow. So we were very shocked that all of a sudden we were being told she was terminal. So we travelled down from London, but by the time we got there, she was already clinically dead. And when we returned to Hammersmith and spoke to the nurses there, they thought it was very extraordinary that she'd be unconscious. And they said, just for peace of mind, go and have a look at the medical file. So once Dad was home and we had Christmas and we'd all come to terms a little bit more with Gran's passing, we went to the hospital, and that's when we saw that she'd been administered fentanyl, and diamorphine and midazolam and clopramazine, and some of those drugs we were aware of because my father was on them for the severe pain that he was in his bone marrow transplant. But we knew fentanyl because it was only licensed in those years for chronic intractable pain due to cancer. And we thought, well, why has Gran been given this? She had no sign of pain in her medical file. An external doctor had even seen her the day that Jane Barton had prescribed the fentanyl.
That's the doctor who according to this report yesterday,
she was the clinical assistant,
presided over this regime.
That's right. And she had prescribed this after an external doctor, who was actually a psychiatrist, had visited with my grandmother and had reported in her medical notes that she was happy, no complaints, said tablets make her mouth sore, she's just waiting for her daughter. And when we read that from the medical file, which we only got to see in 2008 as we prepared for the inquest into my grandmother's death. She was
Why? Because that page was missing, was it?
Yes,
from the first time you were allowed to look at the medical file.
Yes.
So you didn't know an external doctor had said your grandma was pretty much perfectly happy.
Yes, we didn't.
All you saw was the fact that Jane Barton had administered these very powerful drugs.
And we went down what we thought was the right route, and we had an independent review, and that took 16 months. And when we received that report, we realised in which the brutality of the way that my grandmother had died, and that outlined the fact that she got up on the 19th, which as we know now was because she had this equivalent to 135 milligrams of morphine running through her body. They said that she was aggressive, she was disorientated, as you can imagine a woman of her stature would be. She was a very slight lady, and she threw nurses up against a wall, allegedly, and so they pinned her to the floor and they injected her with 50 milligrams of clopramazine, which is a very strong antipsychotic drug. And then they put the syringe driver in her back with...
Which is like a pump.
It's a pump of the 40 of diamorphine and midazolam, and then they walked her. And this is what was in the report. And they walked her until she was done in, and then they laid her in the bed, and then they called the family. And that was 23 hours after they started that, what I can only call... I don't think I could say it on television.
Torture?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So that has what has kept us going for 20 years. And we've been through, as you saw from yesterday's news releases, we have been through hell and back. We haven't been afforded the funding. We haven't been afforded any legal representation through the course of all of this. We've just today started a GoFundMe page for the victims of Gosport to try and get some money behind us so that we can actually get this into a criminal court and get the proper representation that we need.
Let me ask Mike what you would like to see happen next, Mr. Hobday.
Well, can I just say, first of all, thank you to Bridget for real hard work in this, because I don't think without her and Gillian, I don't think we really would be sitting here today talking about it. So thank you, Bridget, for all your hard work. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
And so do obviously 400 other families. Well, next, I'd really like to see criminal justice done. I mean, the people there were administering drugs that people didn't need and shortened their lives. So that really amounts to manslaughter. So. That justice needs to be done. An inquiry needs to be next, a criminal inquiry. So another police constabulary, not Hampshire, needs to be looking into it and seeing what charges can be brought.
And what about you, Bridget? What would you like to see happen now?
I think now the government have to... we've got a meeting with the Bishop in October. We've been told that the government are now going to consider what the findings are in the report. But absolutely, we cannot wait any longer. We have lost relatives already as part of over the course of these 20 years who have also been Ian Wilson, who stood beside us at the inquest in 2009. He's now passed. My mother has been at the forefront with Gillian Mackenzie. You know, they're well in their 70s and 80s now. Let's have no more delay. Let them stand up and say, we were wrong, we didn't support you, we now, all of your concerns have been substantiated, and this needs to go into a criminal court, and it needs to happen fast. That's my opinion.
And you mean criminal charges brought against Dr. Jane Barton and others?
And the nurses, and I think that in terms of other findings, whether it be corporate manslaughter, this has been covered up from the CEO of the Trust, Max Millett, back in 2000, right the way through, and all of those people need to be named and they need to be held accountable.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Bridget Reeves, thank you. Mike Hobday, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. We will, of course, continue to follow what happens next. Thank you.
Great.